5:30, and Amy's going to talk a little bit more about the after hours group in a few minutes. And do not forget, June 28th, the club is going to the Triumph game. Has anybody been to a Triumph game? Yes. Is it fun or not? I mean, it is a blast. Did you have fun? Did you have fun when you went? Yes. It's a lot of fun. Very active night. Okay. So I'm going to start with a positive thought for today. So this thought is keep going. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. You may fall, but you will also eventually find your way forward. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep moving. Take one step, then another until you arrive. Will you stand for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, indivisible, and liberty, justice. Okay, and Jeff is going to do our happy bucks for us. Where is he? Oh, there he is. All right.
Thanks, Christine. This is for comedic effect. You'll notice that I'm putting on a hat. That'll become meaningful in a moment. Who has some happy bucks? Happy stories. $1, $5, $10. I'm going to start at 100. All right. And that way, when I work my way down to 1, it's going to be a little more palatable for you. Who has some happy bucks? Mr. Fabian.
5 I can handle. Well, as you guys know, you might have known we celebrated our 100-year anniversary of the Poinsett Hotel that happened on Saturday, pretty much exactly 100 years ago. So, well, you know, it's not a celebration for me so much, but you know, for the community, because that hotel has seen a lot of interesting people staying here over the years. You know, way back, historic people like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Amelia Earhart, as you might remember. But then you had others like President Obama, or actors like Keanu Reeves, John Travolta, George Clooney, singers like Renee Fleming, musicians Ringo Starr, Joan Baez. I mean, you know, I had a lot of famous people here over the years. So we had a big celebration on Saturday, and we're very proud of this hotel and what it means for the community. So thank you.
It's awesome, Fabian. And if you haven't seen it, go on your way to the parking garage. There's this wall of pictures. Thank you. And Fabian is in every one of them. There's what, like 30 pictures with all these famous folks? It's amazing. You should stop and take a look. Miss Susie.
I am delighted that I have a brand new great niece, 8 pounds, 2 ounces. No grandkids yet, but at least we'll take it.
Congratulations. Hey, Rob.
I'm having a show of one of the artists that I represented for many years in my gallery at Gallery 906. And it's Thursday night. If you're interested in Jorge Garcia, the classical and jazz guitarist, is going to perform from 7 to 8. So if you want to come by, and if you want to come by there on Saturday and just look at art before it shuts down on Sunday, because then it's going to be closed, and I'll put it. But if you're interested in some art and music Thursday night, let me know.
Thanks, Rob. Anyone else for some happy bucks? Happy. Oh, we got a couple. Ladies first, Jason.
Okay, so this is the first meeting I have run, so I'm throwing in $5 to keep the happiness going.
Thanks, Christine. Jason.
So a few happy dollars. My daughter made it safely to Brazil for her Rotary Youth Exchange for the summer. So she'll be there for 3 weeks. And then the family that she's staying with will send their daughter back and stay with us for 3 weeks. And of course, we'll bring her to one of the clubs as soon as we can. But I just want to put it out there that if anybody has any teenagers that are interested in a Rotary Youth Exchange, the summer times is a great opportunity. It's a lot less formal. It's not the full year commitment. but it's a great opportunity just to go spend some time with some other kids around the world. The kids come back to you. You have a great time with them, showing them America, showing them Greenville and everything we have to offer. So great opportunities.
It's awesome. Good luck to your daughter. Thanks, Jason. Anyone else? Mr. Rusty.
So I have two things to talk about. Number one, I just got back from Nashville, Tennessee, where I visited the most beautiful baby girl you'll ever meet in your whole life. Her name is Alice Catherine Enfinger. She's 1.5 months old. They live in Old Hickory, a little village outside of Nashville, and I'm super excited. I'm dying to go back to see her. The other thing I want to announce is 1 week from today, I start a new job as general counsel of the South Carolina Bar Association. So good to be employed. Thank you.
That's awesome. Congrats, Rusty.
I'll pay you later, I promise.
I'm going to follow up and target his kneecaps if he doesn't put it back in here. But anyone else? Those are some great happy bucks. So you remember that comedic effect thing, right? I'm taking off one hat and putting on another and introducing our guests. I'm going to read you all's name. If you could please stand, remain standing, and hold your applause for our guests until the end, that would be great. Robert Pokora, guest of the club. There you are. Charlie Kaler, guest of the club. And Jocelyn and Starrett Greene, also guests of the club. I don't know if Jenny's in here. Jenny, did I miss any latecomers? Oh, Bella. Bella Schaefer, if you wouldn't mind standing, please. Welcome. And let's give our guests a round of applause. Welcome. And I don't know who's next. Christine, are you? Thank you. You guys can sit now. Christine, are you up or who's up next? I don't have a... Amy, come on up. Oh, and we got Forrest Briggs, guest of Mark Leonard. There he is. Hey, Forrest.
Thank you, kind sir.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Amy Randall. I have been sort of the interim after hours group director. We launched a little over a year ago. I'm excited to say we have about 30 after hours members. Just to give you a little update, because I don't think everybody knows exactly what the after hours group is all about. When we launched a year ago, we called ourselves a companion club because that's what Rotary International calls it. But we are really all one club. It's basically a different meeting option. So for me personally, I cannot make it to lunch twice a month. And the tough part about being a lunch club member is you prepay for all these lovely lunches. And I need as many people who can afford to pay for all these lunches to keep going because we want to continue to meet here for lunch at the Westin Poinsett Hotel, which is a lovely place to be. But if you can't make it to lunch twice a month, if you join as an after hours member, you don't have to prepay for any food. So it's a lot more affordable to be a member of the after hours club. I still come to lunch all the time. I just pay when I do come to lunch. So you get a little bit cheaper per lunch deal. If you're a member of the lunch club, you prepay for the lunches. If you're in the after hours group, you just pay $25 every time you come to lunch. One thing I wanted to let you know is our focus is really on networking service. We don't have speakers at the after hours meeting. When we first came together, we polled the entire group of new members and said, what service projects are you most interested in? And so we chose our number one project is a child's haven. That rose to the top as what everybody really wanted to get involved in. We've done several service projects with them already. The other two that we identified are Rebuild Upstate and Harvest Hope. So we've already done projects with both of those. And then the networking aspect, we really are all about some networking, getting to know people. So we've established every other meeting now, we're going to do a little networking circle. So if you've ever been to one of those chamber meetings where everybody gets in a circle and does their 60-second elevator pitch, that's what we're going to do. So we'll have a little bit of time for casual networking, little formal circle round, and then some more casual networking. So it's a great way to get to know some awesome people. I would like to invite you all to come. We are all one club. Come to as many meetings as you can. We got Thirsty Thursday. We got Coffee and Connections. We got lunchtime. I know we're all really busy, but I love being involved with the awesome people in this club. I want to see your beautiful faces as much as I can. And one other exciting piece of news, rolling in with Christine, starting the new Rotary year, Iris Park, if you don't mind standing up just for a quick second. I didn't warn you. I told you I was going to talk and not make you get up here, but I didn't say I wasn't going to make you stand up. So Dr. Iris Park is going to be our after hours group director. So thank you, Iris. So you don't have to come up and say anything today, but come see us on Thursday night. If you have any questions about the After Hours Club, you can talk to me, Jenny, Christine. Be happy to share any more information that you guys want to have. And I'm going to check my little notes real quick here. All right, I think I got it. And next, Scott's going to come up and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see you all here today. It's my honor to introduce to you Bethany Greene. Bethany is a regional economist at the Charlotte branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Prior to this role, Bethany was a regional affairs research associate at the Denver branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, where she supported regional research and outreach efforts in the Mountain West region. Bethany has a bachelor's degree in economics from Emory University and a master's degree in data analytics and policy from Johns Hopkins University. I'm so excited to have Bethany here and excited to have her parents here with her too today. Join me in welcoming Bethany to speak to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bethany Greene. I'm a regional economist at the Richmond Fed, located at our Charlotte branch, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today to give an economic update. Now, I must say that giving an economic update right now, given all the uncertainty that we're experiencing, it's quite something, to say the least. But what I hope to do today is ground us in what we're seeing in the data so far, and then also augment that with some of the anecdotes that we've been hearing from our business contacts. So just a little bit of background on the Richmond Fed. I think something we do very, very well is we don't only look at the data, we listen to people. So I say all of that to say that during our Q&A, looking forward to your questions, as well as any insights that you have in your respective businesses and industries. So let's get started. Before any presentation, I have to give my standard disclaimer. Everything I say today is my view alone, not necessarily the view of the Fed. Yes. All right, so these are the 4 points that we're going to be going over today. The first one being that the US economy has been resilient. When we think about what we've been through over the past couple of years, record high unemployment, for example, record high inflation, high interest rates, the fact that the US economy has held up over the past couple of years is quite remarkable. What we're experiencing right now in 2025 is a heightened level of uncertainty. And when we think about what that does to businesses' decision-making, it's really important to think about. So I'll talk about that in a bit. Secondly, if you're familiar with the Fed, you know that there are two things that we're trying to accomplish. The first one is stable inflation. So inflation at around 2%. What we've seen right now is we've made a lot of progress on inflation, but we're still a little bit above that 2% level. So I'll talk about what that means and some of the risks to inflation moving forward. On the other side of our mandate, we want to make sure that the labor market is healthy. So that's the second side of what the Fed is trying to accomplish. In that regard, we're seeing a pretty stable labor market, but things are definitely coming into better balance. Labor supply and labor demand are coming into better balance. Things may be slowing down a bit, so I'll talk about what that means in a bit. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about policy. So what is the Fed doing with interest rates? Most recently, we saw that the Fed paused interest rates once again. That's the fourth time they've done so. I'll talk a little bit about what that means. All right, so of course we have to start out with the standard GDP chart. How is the economy doing at a macro level? How is it doing overall? So of course we look at GDP, or economic activity. Like I said before, the economy has been through a lot, but when we look at GDP, if you look at these blue bars, you see that we've seen very strong readings of GDP growth. So solid GDP growth is at around 2%. What we've seen over the past couple of years are readings above that, things like 2.5, 2.8, 3.1. Now, you probably can't even see it that well here, but the most recent reading of GDP was actually negative. And we definitely don't want to see negative GDP growth. So the first quarter of 2025, we saw a decline in GDP at around 0.2%. Now, this sounds kind of alarming, but when we look under the hood, when we look at the components of GDP and why we saw that decline, it eases, some fears. So if you're familiar with macroeconomics, the components of GDP are consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. As you can see, if you look at the last data point, the reason why we saw that decline is that green bar. That is what is the most negative, and that's net exports. So what happened this year? Well, we heard about announcements of tariffs, and a lot of businesses tried to get ahead of tariffs, so they imported more. So that is why we saw that large swing in net exports that affected GDP. So that's the main reason why. Now, I will also say something that also contributed to the decline in GDP is going to be a bit of softening in consumption. If you look at the dark blue bar there, it's not as large as it was in the couple quarters preceding it. So we did see a bit of a slowdown in consumption that contributed to that decline, but the main reason is businesses imported a lot to get ahead of tariffs. So not too worrying when we look under the hood. Just a major difference in behavior for businesses. Now, even though things seem to be holding up in the hard data, that's what economists refer to as, GDP growth, unemployment, things like that. That's the hard data. When we look at the soft data, which is more like survey data, how businesses and consumers are feeling, what we do see is that people are uncertain. So this is the small business survey, and they asked a couple of questions on how small businesses are feeling about the economy. What we see here is that businesses are very uncertain. So if you look at the light blue line there, we see that it's quite elevated, uncertainty is elevated. And this matters because a lot of businesses want to be certain about, their decisions. They want to know that, the economy is going to be in this certain place in a couple of months. They want to know how certain policies are going to affect their business. A lot of businesses are a bit uncertain, and what we're hearing is that they're staying, a little bit on the sidelines. Maybe they're not hiring as much as they would if they were more certain. Maybe they're not investing in that new project like they would if they were more certain. So we're hearing some of those anecdotes. Now, I think what's interesting is that even though businesses are uncertain, they're not pessimistic. So the optimism index is going to be the dark blue line. And what we see there is, it's still quite elevated, especially when we compare it to the last couple of years. So it's an interesting combination of uncertainty and a good amount of optimism still. Now, I talked about how we've seen strong economic growth over the past couple of years. The major reason why we've seen that strong growth is the consumer. People have been spending their money. As you can see here, this is consumption broken down into services and goods. And I want you to pay attention mostly to services, because if you trace that line, you can probably tell this story. During the pandemic, we saw a very large decline in services consumption. People weren't outside going to gyms, they weren't outside going to salons, they were staying in the house. So we've come up with this concept of revenge spending. So after, people were able to go back outside, they were essentially taking revenge on the economy. So if there was a concert they wanted to go to, they're gonna go. If there is, a travel destination that they've always wanted to go to, they're gonna go. It's this new lease on life mentality that has supported consumption growth over the past couple of years. Now, something we're a bit worried about is the most recent data when it comes to retail sales. So we've actually seen a bit of a dip in retail sales most recently, but the data can be a little bit volatile. So I think we need a couple more data points before we can be sure that retail sales and consumption is actually declining. But there are a couple of things that we're going to watch this year to determine where consumption is going to go in the next couple of months. The first one is consumer sentiment, how people are feeling about the economy. So this is important because if people don't feel good about the economy, if they don't feel good about their job and their job security, they're going to pull back. We've already heard about, maybe people pulling back a little bit on non-discretionary items. So also non-discretionary non-discretionary services. So for example, people may not, go to that travel destination that they would have a year ago. Maybe they're not going to go international. Maybe they're going to stay domestic. So there are things like that that we've been hearing. Now, I also want to point attention to the fact that most recently we did see consumer sentiment tick up slightly. So that also shows you that it's a little bit of a volatile data point. I think things are changing so quickly. As people read the news, as people think about different policies and different policies change, that's going to affect how they feel about the economy. But as you can see here, even though it ticked up recently, it's still down compared to where it was at the beginning of the year. So that's important to monitor. The other thing that's important to monitor is going to be the labor market. If people are employed and feel secure in their employment, that's going to support consumption. So the unemployment rate, which is on the left, is historically pretty low. 4% is a historically low number when it comes to unemployment rate. Now, if you look closely, the South Carolina line, which is the light blue line, has ticked up quite a bit recently. But what I will say about that is South Carolina is a little unique. I think we've seen a lot of people enter the labor force, and it takes time for those people to become employed, essentially. So that may be the source of that rise in unemployment, not necessarily that we're seeing a lot of people getting laid off. But like I said before, a strong labor market, a low unemployment rate is going to continue to support spending as people feel secure in the income that they have. On the right, what is also going to support spending is real wage growth. If you look closely at this, you'll see that it was negative between 2021 and 2023. That's because of inflation. So even though people's wages were increasing, inflation was cutting into that additional income that they gained. Now we're seeing positive real wage growth, which is going to support spending as people have more disposable income to spend their money on a variety of things. So real wage growth is going to continue to support spending. Something else we're looking at is net worth. So what we've also seen over the past couple of years is people getting richer, so asset holders getting richer. We've seen a lot of growth in the stock market. We've also seen a lot of people's homes appreciate in value. And in economics, we have this thing called the wealth effect. Basically, when people feel richer, they spend more money, even if it's not necessarily, liquid. They feel more supported by the wealth that they have. So that is what we have been seeing over the past couple of years. But if you look at the most recent data point, we did see a bit of a dip in net worth because of some volatility that we saw in the stock market and financial markets. So that has the potential to impact that wealth effect. Lastly, I want to talk about household balance sheets. This has been a really big discussion, especially when we think about all of the debt that people have racked up over the past couple of years. Something we've been hearing from our contacts is that high-income consumers are doing very, very well. Low-income consumers are pulling back, not doing as well. They've been very much affected by inflation. If you think about what low-income consumers spend their money on, mostly, things that they need. So they have less space to decrease their spending in response to inflation. So we've seen a lot of pressure on those households. Something we've been looking at is, are households, paying off their debt? Are we seeing a rise in delinquencies? Well, we've been tracking credit card delinquencies, and we have seen a bit of an uptick, as you can see. But I also want to point your attention to where we were during the global financial crisis. So, it pales in comparison, but it's still a bit of an uptick. So I'd say it's more of like a yellow flag. It also may be a bit of a normalization. So basically, maybe we're just returning to where we were supposed to be prior to the pandemic. Because if you remember, a lot of people got fiscal stimulus. They used that fiscal stimulus to pay down their debt. So maybe right now, since that has dried up, we're seeing things normalize. Another thing we're paying attention to is student loan debt and delinquencies. So over the past couple of years, if people didn't pay their student loans, they weren't reported to credit bureaus. That's no longer the case. So we're seeing delinquencies for student loans return to where they were before. So they're not increasing to, an alarming level, but they're returning to normal, as you can see in this green line. Now, it's also important because, there may have been a lot of people who weren't paying their student loans and using that money to buy other things. So if now they're paying their student loans, that's less money to go into, that consumption data that we've seen before. So it's definitely things to watch. So we talked about consumption. Let's talk about inflation. How is the Fed doing when it comes to inflation? Now, as you can see in this chart, we've made a lot of progress. So we're no longer at that 7% level that we had in 2022. We've come down a lot to that 2% goal that the Fed is looking for. So we're not yet at 2%. We're hovering above it, but we've made a lot of progress there. The main reason why we continue to see some pressure when it comes to inflation is mostly housing in the dark blue and core services. If you look a couple of years back, you see this chart was a lot more colorful. That's because core goods and then food and energy were contributing a lot to inflation at that time. That's no longer the case. Now, one of the risks that has been highlighted a lot lately to inflation is going to be tariffs. So how are tariffs going to affect the inflation numbers? As you can see right now, we're not seeing tariffs affect the data as of right now. But something that we've been doing is we've been asking questions. We've been asking our contacts, how are you dealing with tariffs? So something we've asked our manufacturers as well as our service businesses is, what changes have they made in response to tariffs? And as you can see here, most of our manufacturers, which is going to be the blue bar, said that they have planned price increases. Another thing that they're doing is they've moved up purchases. So like I said before, increasing their imports ahead of, the proposed tariffs. They're saying that they've done that. Some have said they've increased prices. Others have said that they've canceled or delayed their capital expenditures. So we are seeing some response to tariffs. So businesses, aren't just doing nothing. They are absolutely responding. So I think it's an important insight to have. So last thing I'll talk about when it comes to inflation is going to be housing. So not just in terms of, that short-term inflation number, but the overall cost of living issue that a lot of people are dealing with. So how are home prices doing right now? As you can see here, I picked out a couple of our South Carolina metro areas. Then Greenville is going to be highlighted in the dark blue. I think what's interesting is Greenville didn't see the same level of home price appreciation that other metros in our state did, but they still did see a significant amount of home price appreciation, as you can see here. Now, more recently, we see that home price growth has softened a lot, but that doesn't mean that home prices are decreasing. That just means they're not growing as fast. So I think it's something to pay attention to, especially since we are seeing a lot of people being priced out of the housing market. We're seeing higher interest rates, and that's why we have seen that softening of home price growth for now. Something we also pay attention to is housing cost burden. So for a household to be housing cost burdened, that means that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And that matters because as people spend more and more and more on housing, they have less and less money to spend on other things. So that is, a risk to consumption. So what I have here is our district map. So at the Richmond Fed, we cover North and South Carolina, West Virginia, Virginia, and Maryland. And as you can see, the Carolinas are affected a lot more than our other states in our region when it comes to housing cost burden. And there's certain areas in South Carolina where this is more acute. Charleston, for example, also the Low Country, if you look closely there, Columbia, the upstate as well, not to the same degree as some of the other areas, but it's still a major issue. So lastly, I wanted to point out this home ownership affordability monitor to really show how drastically things have changed over the past couple of years. So this monitor basically asks a simple question. Can the median income earner afford the median priced home? If they can, the line is above 100. If they cannot, the line is below 100. As you can see, Greenville was doing very well over the past couple of decades. The median income earner absolutely could afford the median price home, and things really fell off a cliff around, I'd say, 2022. And that's no longer the case. And that's no longer the case for a lot of metros across the United States. And I also have Columbia here and Charleston, of course, to a much greater extent. So what we're seeing right now is a lack of supply of housing, higher interest rates, higher prices, and combination of those things is, home ownership that, seems impossible for a lot of first-time home buyers, especially. So lastly, I'll touch on the labor market. So the second mandate that the Fed has, how is the labor market doing overall? This is a bit more tricky because there are a couple of, there's a lot more data to tell a different story about the labor market. Let's start with payroll employment. So what we want to see is that businesses continue to add new jobs every month. That is the case. As you can see, in May of 2025, we added 139,000 jobs. Before then, we added around 150,000 jobs. So we continue to add a decent number of jobs every month, and that's a good sign. Now, if you look closely at the numbers, you'll see that things have sort of slowed down. So we're not adding jobs at the same pace as we were in the United States overall, as we were a couple of years ago. That's not the case in South Carolina. South Carolina continues to see accelerated employment growth. Most recently, in April 2025, we added around 7,000 jobs. Before then, 11,000 jobs. I circled the line up there to show you how steep it's becoming in terms of how much employment is growing in the state. So we are seeing very strong employment growth in South Carolina. And that is not the case all over the United States. If we think about the last couple of years, how much industry we have attracted, how many businesses we've attracted, how many new labor force entrants we've attracted. This makes a lot of sense. Now I say that, but the employment growth is not the same across different metro areas in South Carolina. As you can see, we have some clear winners: Charleston for one, Myrtle Beach, and Greenville. But I want to point your attention to where the United States ranks on this graph. And South Carolina has seen double the employment growth that the United States has seen over the past 5 years. Sumter is the only metro where we're seeing some declines, but caveat to that, yes, they haven't regained all of the employment that they lost during COVID. But if you look at Sumter's employment over the past year, they're seeing very strong employment growth. So not even across metros, but most of them are, exceeding that of the United States. Now, that sounds great for the most part, but when we dig deeper into some of the data on the labor market, we see that things may be slowing down. If you recall 2022 was a nightmare for a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses could not find workers. The labor market was very, very tight. People were hopping from job to job, industry to industry. So we were seeing a lot of issues in terms of attracting workers. What we're seeing now is that's no longer the case. Things are slowing down. So the job openings rate, for example, has declined. As you can see, it was really, really high in 2022, but that has since leveled out. The hiring rate has also declined. What we're hearing from businesses is that maybe they're not laying off workers, but maybe they're not backfilling, right? Maybe they're allowing some natural attrition. They're not hiring at the same rate. And then the quits rate has also declined somewhat. And that shows you that job seekers don't feel that great about the labor market. Employees don't feel that great about the labor market. They're trying to stay put. If they feel great about the labor market, they're more likely to hop from place to place and get higher wages. That is not the case right now. So we're seeing some slackening in the labor market. Not necessarily a decline yet, because we're not hearing a lot about, layoffs, but that is possible that may happen in the near future. Now, lastly, even though things are slowing down, something that continues to be an issue overall is labor supply. And I want to highlight where we were at the beginning of this graph, where we had the issue of a lot of people wanting to work, not enough jobs for them to fill. And we experienced that for a couple of decades until around 2018, where things flipped. So now we have all these, businesses that are demanding work, not enough people to fill those positions. And that was exacerbated during the pandemic. It's gotten a bit better, but it's likely to be an issue that stays with us, especially considering, an aging population, people not having as many children as they did before. It's likely to be something that continues in the future. So lastly, I'll talk a bit about what the Fed has been doing with interest rates. If you keep up with the Fed, you'd know that the Fed has paused interest rates once again. This time, I think we had our FOMC meeting last week. So this is the fourth time the Fed has paused interest rates. What I'll say is that, just as I said, businesses are uncertain about the trajectory of the economy, about how policies will affect their business. It's a similar narrative. So there's a lot of uncertainty about where the economy will be in a couple of years, in a couple of months. And right now, staying put and kind of determining where things will be, how certain policies will affect the economy is the approach that the FOMC is taking when it comes to policy. All right, so lastly, I wanted to talk a bit about our business survey. So if you're part of a business and you'd like to interact with the Fed a lot more, I'd highly recommend signing up for our business survey. If you'd like to tell, the Fed what to do, I mean, this is your chance. Just kidding. But there are a couple of questions, and then there is open space to provide comments to the Fed as well. It's also a competition with my colleagues, so if you'd like to help me out, please sign up. Thank you. That's all I had. Happy to take any questions. Yeah, absolutely. That's something we're thinking about, especially when it comes to, first of all, wage growth, for example. So since one of the Fed's mandates is price stability, we're definitely looking at how that may affect wage growth, because a shortage of workers is gonna, increase wages. And then, like you said, if there's a lower supply of workers, that's absolutely going to affect the price of goods. So it's something we are looking at. For sure, when it comes to our mandate of price stability. That's a really good question, especially since if you look at the chart and you look at it, a couple of years before, we've seen pretty poor sentiment over the past couple of years, but we continue to see people spend money, which I think is an interesting combination. I think what matters a lot is why people feel poorly about the economy. I think before, people felt poorly about the economy because of inflation. I think right now, as inflation has settled down, I think what may be emerging is people feeling poorly about their job prospects. So if people aren't secure in, their job stability, their job prospects, that may have more of an impact on, how they move forward with consumption. So the sentiment, I must say, it gives us some mixed signals, but it's a useful way to understand how consumers are feeling. Yes. Right. That's a really good point. So the households, so we have two surveys. We have like the payroll survey. So people who are, self-employed, not on a payroll, they wouldn't be included. But we do have the household survey, which does ask if you're self-employed, and those people are included. But it is possible that people are saying, I'm not employed, but they are generating some income. I think that's something that the BLS should absolutely consider. But most people who are self-employed, even if they're not, they have both unincorporated self-employed and incorporated self-employed. A lot of people do say they're unincorporated self-employed, and they would be counted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That's. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's important for us to rely not just on the unemployment number, but also something we do look at is people who are long-term unemployed. We have seen that number increase quite a bit. So that means that it's taking a longer time for them to find a job. No, it's not. We do have like separate data for people claiming unemployment. We haven't seen much of an uptick as yet. But those numbers are basically surveyors asking them, like, are you employed by an employer? Are you self-employed, basically? Mhm. So the chart I showed on housing cost burden, that includes both renters and homeowners. Interestingly, this may not even answer your question, but we've heard more and more about people tapping into their equity that they've gained. So, taking out a HELOC in order to pay for their usual expenses. So we have heard some stories of people, they've gained all that equity over the past couple of years, and now they're tapping into it. So I think that's an interesting and a great point there. Yes.
There's been chatter about the dollar for years, meaning that it's currently the global reserve currency, right? And so, however, having said that, we hear Brazil, Russia, India, China, great countries are trying to establish their own currency. You've got like China is usurping the petrodollar by getting oil through Iran, at least that's my understanding. China's also divested US treasuries. Do we eventually move to like a multipolar reserve currency, or is there a death of the dollar in our lifetimes, or is this just kind of sensationalism?
Yeah. I don't have a answer to that because I can't tell the future, of course, right? But it's something we're absolutely thinking about, especially since we saw, after the tariff announcement, some, disinvestment. And that was absolutely something that we were worrying about. But as to, us becoming a multipolar, I honestly wish I had right. Yeah, what would replace the dollar? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, as of right now, I don't see, what would be the replacement, if I'm being honest. But it's definitely something to think about. No, honestly, no, I don't have an answer to that. But thank you. Yeah, just something I'll be thinking about tonight. Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. Something that my colleagues and I have been thinking about, specifically the buy now, pay later, and people using it more and more for things that we never thought people would be using it for. I think right now we're already seeing a bit of uptick, like I showed before, in some, credit card delinquencies. If we even break it down more by like income, credit score, we're seeing certain households that are more vulnerable already seeing a bit more of a uptick already. So, and I think with people using more of these buy now, pay laters, that's a sign that things aren't going very well for a certain set of households. And I think what we're seeing with the consumption data is that's an aggregate picture. And that's going to reflect mostly higher income consumers because they spend most of the money in the total, in the economy on a macro level. So with insights like that, that shows us like where a lower income, middle income consumer is. And I think it's really important to highlight and show that things are likely deteriorating in that sector of households. Yeah. That could partly be the case, but I think that's right. So I think it's partly education, but I think that shows that we're moving toward, people not being able to pay for their usual expenses and finding alternate means to pay for them. And that's something we've been hearing quite frequently, not just with that, but people tapping into different, I guess, some anecdote that I heard is that people are tapping into their investment accounts, for example, and not replenishing them. So stories like that we have been hearing more frequently from yes. I honestly don't have a specific figure, to be honest, but something I do want to look into. But what I will say is, like I presented before, given, the rise in the cost of living over the past couple of years, the cost of housing, also just inflation in terms of everyday goods, groceries, and things like that. It has gone up quite a bit. And yeah, yeah. Okay. hmm Yeah, absolutely. I think you've given me a great research idea. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the labor force participation rate absolutely declined during the pandemic, hasn't returned to where it was before. We did see an outflow of, for example, retirees. And also, when we look at things by age, we do see that young people haven't, been going into labor force, haven't returned. In terms of manufacturing, that is an area where I think I showed a chart about that match between labor supply and labor demand, where that would likely be, that gap would be a lot larger. Something that I think South Carolina does very well is what we do with our technical education, with our community colleges, with our, actually most of our higher education institutions in terms of matching and kind of developing that workforce and working directly with businesses for that matching to happen. So I think there's a lot of work being done, especially in South Carolina and North Carolina, but it's absolutely a major issue. hmm That's a good point because I've seen this also with, for example, purchasing an iPhone. Like you can pay for the iPhone over, 2 years, zero interest, for example. And for some people, it just makes more sense. And, they continue to just make that payment every month and it's fine. But I guess for people who actually can't afford it, and that's the only way that they could have purchased it, it's a whole different story. So it's a great perspective that you have there. I think I didn't see those buy now, pay laters, years and years ago. Now for example, you buy some clothes online and they give you the option of paying it in 4 installments. So I think it's an interesting time we're living in. I think that it makes sense. Like there's a divide between people who are just like, makes more sense, and those who I actually cannot afford to purchase this right now. And that's where I think the issue is. But it's a great point.
Thank you, Bethany, for all that information. I am not a numbers person. That's why I went to law school. So I appreciate somebody who likes to dig into those statistics. As usual, we had her sign a book that will go to Alexander Elementary. I'm going to remind you of some dates again. After Hours Group is meeting this Thursday night, 5:30, local Q. June the 28th, that's Saturday for the Triumph game. And then next meeting, passing the gavel, please be here to support Roger going out, me coming in. And I would like to give a shout out to everybody who's on Zoom. Let's give them a hand for being out of town and still showing up for a meeting. Thank you to everybody that helped put this meeting together, the tech group, the tech team, and Jeff for doing our happy bucks. He's already left. Congratulations to all the babies. Oh, and congratulations, Fabian, on a 100th anniversary of this hotel. I have one little tidbit. My father worked in this hotel in 1969 when we first came to Greenville. And the story is there was either a bank in the basement or he worked for the accounting department of the hotel. I'm not sure which, but he got fired because he liked to count the money too much. He liked to handle it and organize it, and they fired him because he was too darn slow. Anyway, so we will end our meeting with the 4-way test. If you'll please stand with me. I'm going to let Tom get the slide up. He's going to get it in a second. It's not a big deal. We have a sign. Should we go with the sign? Let's go with the sign. Okay. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.